For your GCSE, you're expected to know and recognise square and cube numbers. So what are square and cube numbers? Let's start with the square numbers. If I take a square that is 5 centimeters long, what we know about squares is that they have the same length for each side. So when we square the numbers, we're finding the area, 5 times 5, which is 25. So the square number is 25, 5 squared. Okay, we can do this for all of the numbers, but we have to know every single number up till 12 squared. 12 times 12, like this. So in the app, it will test to see if you know all of your square numbers. Okay, but also you want to recognize the square numbers like, say, 49. You want to be thinking that's 7 squared, because in the exam, as we get higher up, they use numbers that you would know the square root of, which is going back the other way. So they may ask you the square root of 121, and you might freak out in a non-calculated paper because you're like, what? How do I do that? That would be a horrible decimal. But because 121 is 11 times 11, then the square root of 121 is just 11. So not only do you need to know 4 squared is 16, that way, you also need to know the square root of 16 is 4, going back the other way. Okay, so test yourselves on all of the square numbers, but also when you see something like 81, do you recognize that as 9 squared so you can go backwards? Okay, what about cube numbers? Well, if I take this number here of 5 and turn my square into a cube, then the depth, the third dimension if you like, the depth will be a 5 as well, because cubes have all the same lengths. So here we're looking at the volume. The volume of this would be 5 times 5 times 5, 5 cubed. 5 times 5 is 25, times another 5 is 125. So we need to know the first 5 cube numbers off the top of our head, like this. So 5 times 5 times 5, 4 times 4 times 4 is 64, 3 cubed is 27, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8, and 1 cubed, 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. Okay. So similarly to the square numbers, for the cube numbers, we also need to be able to go backwards. What's the cube root of 64? Again, even scarier than the square root one, if you don't know that 64 is 4 times 4 times 4. They're not going to give you a horrible cube root or square root in the non-calculator paper, okay? Because we don't know how to work those out. So if you see one of these, try not to worry. Take a step back and say, right, it's got to be a whole number, so just try. Is it 2 times 2 times 2? No, that's too small. That's only 8. What about 3? 3 times 3 times 3. 9 times 3 is 27. No, that's too small. And you just keep going until you find it. But ideally, you will learn to recognize these, because something like 64 is 4 cubed, but it's also 8 squared. So these relationships start to be used for the higher level questions, but you won't be able to access them if you don't know their squares and their cubes.